stabilized. So looks like we could go ahead and get started. If we might to get these started, this is a national webinar. So if we're going to use the chat and the Q&A today. And if you want to chat in just where you're calling in from, just to see where we're coming from in this great land of ours, that'd be great. I'm coming from Florida.
I'm here in Massachusetts.
Up in Massachusetts. So
we got another Massachusetts. All right. Maryland.
Right.
Virginia, Florida. Great.
Cool. I'm in Sarasota.
There you go.
Yeah. Very good. Upstate New York. See, look at this. People from all over the place.
All right.
Go Vols. The big city, Pennsylvania. I'm a Penn State grad. You'll probably see that today as we talk today. So welcome. Colorado.
Georgia. All right.
California. All right. I mean, we didn't even plan this, but I think
I know this is
30 states right there. So it's a pretty good diverse group here. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Jonathan, I'll let you kind of kick us off and then and we'll get into the content. So
perfect. Yeah. And thank you, Joe. And thank you to College Aid Pro. Excited to be working together on this webinar to talk all about how to pay the college bill. And, you know, I know Joe will talk about College Aid Pro and all the great work that they do, but it's always great for us to work with industry experts and to help, you know, facilitate and bring some really good information to all of you. So I just want to start with a quick overview of who we are and talk a little bit about our savings plan, which is Private College 529 plan. And to do that, I'm just going to share the screen real quick. Share my screen and just show folks let me pull up our website here. Hopefully everyone can see the website there. And so, you know, as one of the, so my name is Jonathan with Collegewell and Private College 529 plan. For those of you who have known about us for some time, you may know Private College 529 plan. You may not know Collegewell. So about a little over a month and a half ago, we actually rebranded and created a larger brand called Collegewell to really help bring consumers some really relevant information about college financing, planning, and education. And so we do that in a variety of ways, but the primary way is through our website here. And, you know, some really good information for you, depending on where you are in the process, all about kind of college savings, college planning, and we dive into some admissions topics, working with our member institution experts. You know, our goal is just to provide some relevant information from the experts themselves. And so we love working with financial advisors like Joe and some others to have some good content on our site. So when you're perusing and you're thinking about where you can look for information, know that we are one option. And then real briefly, as part of Collegewell, or what we've been known forever, is Private College 529 plan. And so Private College 529 is a prepaid savings plan that allows folks to save on the cost of college by locking in the current rate of tuition and fees at all of the member colleges within our plan, which is close to 300. And so what makes this a bit unique, and I know many of you are familiar with 529s and you're kind of at the point where you're cashing them out, but you know, certainly for younger children or from nieces and nephews, hopefully you've heard of this plan, but if you haven't, what makes us a little unique in the 529 space is that we only work with private college universities, so we have a national scope of colleges across the country. We are a prepaid plan, and so your contributions are locking in the current rate of tuition and fees at all participating schools in the plan. And then finally, we are not tied to any state as a truly national plan in scope. You know, we're kind of providing this option, this prepaid plan across the nation to all of the colleges and universities that we work with. And so, you know, I know Joe is going to be talking a lot about paying the college bill and kind of going through and kind of maximizing and making sure that you're on the right path. But for those of you that are thinking about saving in the future for another child, if you're thinking about private, or even if you have a 529 savings plan right now and your child is going to one of the schools in our plan, you could actually roll over some funds and lock in the last year of tuition and fees. And so I encourage you to check us out. Really great savings option. Again, a prepaid option, so a little bit different than your traditional 529 savings plans, but really a great benefit and a great opportunity to try to get ahead of tuition inflation, which, as we know, will probably be going up in the future pretty quickly, especially at some private college and universities. So with that, I'll leave it there, and I will stop sharing my screen, and I'll turn it back over to Joe. But any questions throughout, I'm happy to answer in the chat panel.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. We're excited to be on the webinar together. It is a unique solution you provide for families, particularly that are looking at private colleges. And as you dig in, there's more flexibility to the plan than I think most people would know. So I definitely encourage people to consider it as part of their funding plan. Interestingly, if you haven't heard, inflation is up. So that includes college looking forward. Their costs to operate. These are large institutions that have a lot of bills to pay. So the estimates are that, they're going to have to increase their tuition and room and board going forward. So if you look at where we're at now, we've had historically low rises in tuition prices. So over the last probably 4 or 5 years, we've had kind of reeled that in. But as tuition or as inflation goes up, the higher ed is going to have to raise their prices to keep up. They got to keep the lights on, literally. So that stuff is more expensive and feeding students. And we all know about the supply chain issues. So that stuff, flows over to these big organizations. So most institutions are doing everything they can to keep the costs down. But the reality is they've got the bills to pay, so they have to make sure they don't go backwards. So private colleges, again, when we look at it, though, one of the things that as we get into, we're going to talk about really kind of the distribution, but I'm going to try to frame this in terms of big picture, how we look at things, go through uniquely the 529, talk about how to effectively use that, make sure that you're decumulating smart, understand how to create a comprehensive college funding plan. So, thinking about not just 1 year, but 4 years, right? So all the way down to any resulting student loans, loan payments, and we'll kind of end on a smart lending strategy, because that's, for most American families, that is part of the process. So understanding that's important. So like I said, go big picture and then break it all the way down to literally how do you fine tooth comb, go through this process, make sure that you're doing it smart. So I do want to learn a little bit about you all, and I'm just going to launch a simple poll. And I just want to know when your kids are graduating. So if you can just let us know, if you're a senior, it's 2022, you're headed off to the fall. Presume there's probably some of those, but we're really, as senior parents will tell you, start this as soon as you can. So, we are seeing earlier and earlier, I call them like interventions. So beginning to plan for this, understand, how to create your budget, how do schools determine your financial aid, and then how to find schools that are going to be generous for the financial aid for you. That's really the sweet spot of College Aid Pro, is to help break through the noise and really understand that the sticker price of college effectively has become irrelevant, particularly if we know how to shop. So one of our key tenets with College Aid Pro is we want to change the way America shops for college. So that may sound weird to you, but the way that we shop for college now is not like we shop for anything else. It's very reverse. I equate it to, if you were a young person, and I think I have a slide for this, the way many of us shop for college these days, it's we think about it in terms of, we go test drive things. This is how I think about it. So what I mean by that is, when we think about how much can our family actually afford, that's one of the things that people leave out of their process. So we think about that. If we only go and test drive Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Bentleys, and all these wonderful cars that, by the way, are all over $300,000, you're going to want them, especially if you're 17 years old. So with college, just understand the sticker price is irrelevant, but the net price that you have to pay, these type of automobiles, we're not getting approved for these. One of the challenges with college is to understand what you're getting into, have a budget, understand here's our out of pocket, here's the budget, and what's our delta. So that's what we'll go through today in paying this bill. So we've got a pretty good mix actually of folks, just to kind of share with everybody. We've got a pretty good mix of people from some juniors, rising seniors, some folks getting ready to pay the bill within the next month, and then some younger. So a pretty good mix of people there. So thanks for sending those in. So this is kind of an important exercise, because when we talk about where we need to go with college planning, there really are these 6 really critical steps. You're preparing for the cost is what we'll talk about today, how to create your budget. And then you've got this whole process to navigate. You've got to apply for admission and scholarships. You've got to apply for financial aid in the fall. And then, so those are mechanical things. When you get into that senior year, things go really quick for these last 4 steps. You've got to apply for admission, 5 steps rather, apply for admissions in the fall, apply for financial aid. And now as a senior, you've gotten back your 8 awards, potentially appealed them, a whole nother topic we've done in the past, but how to effectively appeal for additional money is a good way to cut the cost of college if they'll give you more. And then once you choose the school, it's important you need to know, understand how do we cover the shortfall. So when we talk about, where this process begins, even if you're at the end, if you haven't done the process yet, college pre-approval is an effective exercise that's right inside of our software. So college pre-approval, understand where's it all going to come from. Some of this is understanding what are your opportunities for need-based aid, scholarships, et cetera, as you're in the shopping process, because you want to understand how do we actually find schools that will be generous with us for financial aid. So it really does start with this kind of process of how do we go through and create a budget. So this is the first look inside of the MyCap solution, and there is a free and a paid version of this. So just so you know that there's a lot of this functionality is completely free. So we have every school, we have every scholarship for every school in the country. We'll give you a predictive outcome of what your out-of-pocket cost will be. And that's kind of the finish line we're looking to get to. We're going to calculate what the schools think you can afford, what they call the EFC. We're also going to help you figure out what's your actual budget. So this budgeting exercise that we call college pre-approval, what do we have that we can afford before we actually have to take out any loans? So when you're in this panel, it's just important to exercise, and we're going to walk you through them. But even if you're at the paying for college phase, this is still an effective exercise because you want to know, what do we have for college for this student? Right? So that's the key. For this student, what do we have? Because what you do for one, you typically would like to do for all. So this exercise, what's your current 529 balance? And just what do you have sitting in there now? So when you look at what's saved, once you have your school locked in, you can then pinpoint how much you have from the private college 529, because you know what that tuition is going to be because you buy the credits. If you have accumulation plans where you've got an investment 529, it's the balance that could be market fluctuations. But in either case, when you're at the finish line, you do know here's what we have. So that's a powerful thing. And then what are you contributing? Because you also want to factor that in. And then how long is it till we get off to school? So when this student goes off to school, they're going to have about 33,000. They're going off probably next fall, 15 months out, right? So 33,000 529s. So that's actually a very good balance in 529s. The average balance is less than 30,000 for those that have them. So if you're like most parents, the conversation was, I want to make sure we don't put the kids in debt. We'd love to pay for it and have them be debt free. But for most families, understanding that the 529 is the start, but we have to figure out what else can we apply. So are there any other assets we have earmarked for college, like a mutual fund or something like that, right? So for college, for this student, what do we have set aside, right? So like if we said, you know what, we've got a mutual fund, it's got 30,000. We've always said it's for all 3 of the kids. So we're going to do 10,000 out of that for this particular student. Cash flow is a huge one. So when we talk about cash flow, it's pay as you go. For most families, it's a big part of how they're going to pay for college. So a couple of things to think about is there are things that from a cash flow standpoint that you don't need to change your lifestyle or actually save more, because whatever you were putting into the 529 plan, you're already doing that. So assume that stays here, right? So $200 continues through college. Let's assume that goes in. And then also kids aren't free to feed. So in that cost of attendance is a meal plan. So think of it in terms of instead of $50 a week going out to your grocery bill, it's about $50 a week you're going towards a meal plan at the college, right? And then the other thing to consider is what other expenses are going to go away when they're off to school. So lacrosse or band dues or whatever things that your students are involved in, those things you're already used to paying. And if you're paying private high school tuition, you're probably used to cash flowing a good chunk of that. And I'll get into some of the 529 rules around that in a second, but just understand that exercise, most schools have what's called a tuition payment plan. So you can work with the school to say, hey, we want to pay you X amount of the bill out of our 529. We'd also like to set up a payment plan throughout the semester. And most schools will do that either over a 4 or 5 month period throughout the semester. And so instead of having to take out a student loan and paying it back, or putting it on a credit card, God forbid, and paying it back, you can work with the school to go on a payment plan. So, that monthly cash flow, $600 a month is nothing to scoff at. And over 4 years, that's over $28,000, right? So that's a meaningful number. And for most families, the challenge with college savings is the runway is so short. So if the cash flow is good, cash flowing through school is a big way. About a third of college is paid for, kind of out of pocket, but just understand, again, you don't necessarily have to take out the student loan. You can do it as a payment plan, or you could flow it through a 529 if it was flexible on the distribution. So that's a big part. And then the next part, when we're talking about how do we pay the bill, is cash flow from the student. So what we talk about here is kids working in college that actually goes towards paying expenses, right? Because if it's just for walking around money and beer and pizza money, then we're not going to count it here. But if it's actually going to go towards the cost of tuition and room and board, then we plug it in, right? So that's a valuable exercise, and that's a great way to communicate to the student that you expect them to participate in the cost of college. So, $200 a month or $2,500 over summers, whatever those are, if you need to have that college money conversation and bring that student in, because again, that $200 a month doesn't sound like much, but it's almost $10,000 over 4 years, right? So that's $10,000 we don't take out in student loans, right? So if you can't tell, I'm pretty big on not taking out student loans. I'm not anti-loan, I'm anti-too much loan. I should say that too. And we'll get to how we create parameters around that. But for every $10,000 you take out in student loans, you're going to owe back roughly $100 per month for 10 years. I'll say that again. For every $10,000 you take out in student loans, you're going to owe back roughly $100 per month on the standard 10-year repayment schedule. So in this example, that's going to save you when the student's done, just by committing to pay as you go, that $200 a month, that's going to save you $100 a month for the next 10 years of your life. So simply by just doing it as you go. So powerful way to do it. And then the last piece is there any other folks that would like to contribute? Oftentimes we find that when we meet with families, that we still have this stigma in our country. We can't talk to our parents about money. But with college, the conversation, we are at college now. We are to and through. We've got a bill to pay. So hey, are we talking 20,000 or 20,000 a year, right? Because what I also find is oftentimes parents weren't aware that schools cost 85,000, but also grandparents are really not aware. So make sure you're getting clarity, because we had people that have freshmen through juniors. Ask them now. What do we have? Where is it? How is it positioned? It's beyond the scope of today a little bit, but the grandparent and outside help, there are some changes coming with how that affects financial aid. So if grandparents are involved in the funding, it can really impact financial aid opportunities depending on what vehicle it's in, as well as when it flows into the situation. So again, a little bit beyond today's scope, but getting clarity on what that outside help looks like, because I've had conversations and they said, well, the grandparents said they have it covered. And come to find out, having it covered was $20,000 for all 4 years, because they thought college was $5,000 a year. And I said, it is at the community college. And that's not what they envisioned. So, getting clear on that, understanding, what is that number? Maybe it's 25,000. So, all this put together, this is a family that maybe was thinking, gosh, we just have 529s, but we now have a plan that really we're able to see that, we've got a pretty nice chunk that we can now put towards college and with contribution. So hopefully that's a helpful exercise. Again, this is all part of the free tool with College Aid Pro. And I think it's one of the most powerful pieces that we have, because then you can have a good college money conversation with your young adults to do it. So, we have now $106,000 budget before we have to take out any student loans, right? We looked at parents' assets, parents' cash flow, if the student has anything to contribute, and then these grandparent outside assets. So we now have a very powerful position now, because we can go back and say, how does this apply to our funding plan? And what does this mean for us for our schools? So I'll come back in here when we demonstrate kind of how to pay the bill. But I want to get back in over here. So we talked about that pre-approval. So I want to talk through now, like once you have your budget, just giving you some understanding on the different funding process and savings vehicles that are out there. Obviously we're big fans of the 529 college savings plan. It helps you save and accumulate. one thing that I point out, because we do have some folks in this younger bracket, we kind of think of the 0 to 14 as the saving part, and then we're still going to save to and maybe even through college, right? Because just understanding like what type of schools are we looking at. In-state schools, some of the marquee in-state schools are running right around 30,000 now. The average is around 22, but and then our elite privates are 60,000 plus. So thinking in terms of how do we plan for that, I know there's great accumulation calculation tools around, how do we save and how do we hit a target? We typically would say, one thing with your 529s is two things. Know where your target is. How far out are we? Because if you haven't been watching the stock market, it goes up and down. It's particularly down this year. So when we talk about, one of the things with the accumulation and getting towards this goal, are we looking to pay for a state school, a private school, an elite private? Like what are we looking at? What's our target? So for most families, when you talk about that target, oftentimes it's, let's plan for the cost of half of a state school, or let's plan for the cost of a private, half of a private. So just get clarity with you and your spouse or significant other on, what that looks like what your target is. Because if you don't know what that target is, you don't know what to aim for. And we'll get into kind of net cost, because that's really a big part of this. So that's why we usually say targeting half of the cost of private is about right, because they discount their tuition over 53%. And I'll say that one again, the schools that participate in the private college 529, most of them discount their tuition over 50%. They've got great endowments, great education. So it just depends if they do need-based aid or merit scholarships, and I'll show you some of that as we get into school analysis. But again, when we look at the accumulation phase, we kind of shift our mindset to understand when we're trying to go towards a private college, these numbers to the right here, if you've got a 10-year-old, become pretty intimidating, right? So if we know that we're inflating the cost at 5%, and we're getting a 5% rate of return, that's level. But what if we don't get a 5% rate of return? What the private college 529 does is it gives you this. Whatever that cost inflates at, they're going to give that to you. So if you put in the cost today, you buy those credits, they're going to inflate it with the cost aggregate of what the schools do to make sure that you pay today's price no matter when you go. So that's a pretty powerful thing, because when you invest in an investment 529, which are also great, and diversifying is what I would recommend, having some investment, but understanding this is kind of a hedge with private college. If you say, we're going to bet that schools are going to go up, and we're basically going to guarantee that our savings keep pace. So, there's two different ways to think about it. But if you had to save in there, you can look at, like, if we save for a quarter of the future price of this school, a 10-year-old going off to school in 8 years, you got to save $825 a month to get to a quarter of it. If you want to get to half, here's your number. So finding your targets, working with a financial professional to do so is a way to do that. So, and just fundamentally looking at public colleges, obviously the numbers are very different because the sticker price is, a third, right? So the targets and the goals. So getting clear on your targets, and then once you're at college, you've got the pot of money that you have because we know what we have. We've been able to save, and maybe you've saved in one of these different vehicles, because now we've got to figure out how do we save, but now how do we get the money out? How do we decumulate? So that's an important thing to consider in this process, because when we look at how we measure what are the different instruments we can use, these are the things we look at, right? So, and this is to and through college. So we're going to look at, is it flexible? How flexible is it? 529s are great from a flexibility standpoint. We'll go through some particulars on the 529 in a second. What about the investment flexibility, right? 529s do have some constraints on the investments, but they've gotten a lot better, even the investment 529s, on having low cost index, passive mutual funds, and even ETFs in some cases. So the investment flexibility has gotten much better from a tax efficiency standpoint. You really can't beat the 529, especially if you use it for higher education expenses. So, from a financial aid perspective, it's kind of neutral. It acts as if it's any other kind of instrument. So from a financial aid standpoint, it's pretty good as well. The custodial account, right? This was for years. 529s really started to hit the scene around 2001. And before that time, we used custodial accounts a lot. And that's oftentimes still what we see grandparents have accumulated in. And if that's the case, you just got to understand that a custodial account, the reason we say below average for financial aid, that's actually considered an asset of the student. And for the financial aid formulas, it's assessed at about 4 times the rate. So 20% versus around 5%. So if that's the case and you've got a custodial account, if you're a financial aid candidate, you want to understand like, how is that going to impact us? So, just again, this is going to be in the follow-up, so you can just have, but this is kind of how professionally we look at like, where should we save? And then, as we distribute, how do we do that? Because the operational flexibility comes into the funding pretty significantly. So let's see here. So the 529, I'm going to go through this in pretty good detail, so that because for most of us, hopefully this is a part of it, because we already talked through the cash flow and that stuff. It's cash flow, but the 529 plan. So hopefully we know it's a tax-free withdrawal if it's used for qualified higher education expenses. The other piece to understand is if you do have any state income tax deduction for the contributions. Now, why is that important when we're talking about paying for college? Well, I'll give you an example in the state of Ohio, where I have a lot of my clients and have a firm. In the state of Ohio, if you use the state of Ohio plan, you can use whatever state you want, but you want to understand, does your state have an income tax benefit for using their state? So in the state of Ohio, you can put in up to $4,000 and they'll give you a state of Ohio income tax deduction. So in the state of Ohio, the state income tax is around 5%. So you put in $4,000, you're basically going to save around $200 in taxes. So, it's kind of a pay it forward. But when we talk about cash flowing through college, that may be something to consider, to earmark the money, flow it through the 529, et cetera. So that piece is something, just to be aware of if there is one. And if there's not, then you can go to the open market. You can choose where you want to invest your 529 or college savings dollars, I should say. If 529 is a selection, consider the private college 529, but also, just understand you can choose from whatever 529s are out there. So what's qualified? A couple things to unpack here, and there's been some changes. And some enhancements, I would say, that we'll go through. So basically, obviously tuition, but also anything that is directly billed from the school, you can definitely deduct. And then even some things that aren't directly billed, like books and supplies, things like that can also be used from 529. Anything that supports a student in their education can be used. The one that I get a question on all the time, what about cars? The answer is no. You can't buy a car with a 529 plan. If we could, I think we'd probably see more money come into 529s. But it's really for higher education expenses. Now, what's changed is that there has been a provision now where you can use it for K through 12. So it has been approved, but it's only up to $10,000 per year. So that's a big change. And then the other big change is you're allowed now to use up to $10,000 per beneficiary of 529s to repay student loans. So people, that's a common question always came up. Gosh, we had money left over. We took out loans. Well, now you can have at least up to $10,000 you can take from that 529, and you can actually use it to pay off student loans. So that's been a nice thing. And then also, like, where we're on qualified expenses, I think I have a chart for this. Yeah, so we have this. So I just had some distributions here, like they can be used for qualified higher education, all those things. And then the 10,000 per beneficiary for secondary. The one thing I caution on that particular provision, make sure that if it's a college savings plan, make it for college. If it's a K through 12, make it for K through 12. There should be different goals, and you may different investment vehicles may be appropriate. So one thing's too, like as you're getting here and you're at the finish line, I really encourage people to look at your asset allocation. So, we can talk provisions and all that stuff all day long, but you want to make sure that if you are in an investment 529, make sure that if you're at college, and I would say most of the plans have what's called a age-based plan, which basically, as you get closer to your target goal, they're going to wind down the investment. So it's predominantly in cash, maybe some bonds as you get to about 16 years old. And this is a great case in point. This year markets are down, 8-10% plus. So you would rather preserve the capital than try to go after the gains at this phase of the game, and that's just good investing based on your target. So, if you haven't logged in and you're looking at paying this bill soon, I would definitely review that asset allocation and make sure it's appropriate for you. So we hit on most of these, and then I have, I think, yeah. So I wanted to hit, just because it's kind of newer, So I like this K through 12. If you're at this phase and you're thinking about how do we get money out of the 529 plan, this is just an example of how it could be used. So if you look at a private school, if we had tuition expenses of 6,500, we took out 7,500, we'd only have qualified 6,500. That other 1,000 would be non-qualified. Right? So non-qualified meaning there wasn't an expense to support taking that money out. And if you do that, you're going to be subject to the taxes on the growth, right? As well as a 10% penalty if it's non-qualified. So that's an important piece to understand. It's non-qualified. So on this $1,000 right here, even if it was college, same rules would apply in this case, but that $1,000 you'd have to pay, they do a pro rata distribution. So what I mean by that is what percentage did you invest and what percentage is growth? So if of that $1,000, you had put in 600 and now it's worth 1,000, they would say $400 of that is subject to income tax as well as a 10% penalty. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. It's always pro rata. What you take out of the 529 is potentially taxable if it's non-qualified. If it's qualified, you're good. There's no taxes. So that's kind of the first one. And then the one in the middle for Sarah here, if you're looking at $9,000 expense, $9,000 came out of the 529, you're good. It's all qualified. If you had tuition of 18 and you took out 18, only 10,000 can be considered qualified for K through 12. For K through 12. In college, 18 and 18, you're good. That's all qualified as long as you had the tuition expense and expenses to support it. So I wanted to include this example as part of utilizing 529 plans because it's kind of new. And if you're in this scenario where you're potentially thinking of using it for K through 12, just wanted to bring up those examples. So hopefully that's helpful for us. Let me get back here. So just kind of a little bit more deep dive on the 529. The investments that you can do, it's state by state. So states run these 529s. They've got to be state supported, and they typically can allow for pretty significant contributions, 300,000 plus on those 529 college savings plans. So you can put a lot of money in. You can even advance gift them. You can do up to 5 years advance gifting into these. So, pretty robust vehicle as far as getting money in. And then on the back end, when we're taking money out, right? So the question is always, well, what if we don't use the 529? There's quite a bit of flexibility on the back end of these with it. So one question we get, it's not necessarily on here, but on this chart, well, what if we get scholarships, right? Scholarships are awesome. That's what we want. It cuts the cost of college. So if you get a scholarship, there's actually provision in the 529 that says you can take out the dollars for that scholarship. You will have to pay taxes on the growth, but you do not have to pay the 10% penalty. Right. So that's a very unique provision of the 529. Had a conversation with a certified financial planner for 25 years earlier this morning that did not know that provision. So you heard it here. If you get scholarships, you can withdraw the money. It's kind of a pseudo qualified where they're saying, OK, you got scholarship. You can have back your principal. We do want to collect some tax on the tax deferred growth. And that's great because you just got free money for college. So, you can offset that. So that's an important one. If you do get that full ride athletic scholarship or something like that, not very common, by the way. But the flexibility, so that's one that's kind of in the middle, but from a flexibility, what do you do with 529 plans? It's a good problem to have leftover 529s. But some of the things that we talk about is you can transfer that to another beneficiary pretty easily. So, you can always go from one kid to another, even to yourself. So that question came up today. Hey, if I have a leftover 529 and I want to go pursue my PhD, can I use that money? Yep. You could change the beneficiary to yourself and it's all you, as long as there's qualified education expenses. So a lot of flexibility in that. What we see most people doing if they have leftover 529s is creating what I call a legacy 529. So what I mean by that is if your kids get to and through school and you got leftover 529, imagine what a gift it would be to leave $10,000 in there and let it grow for 30 years for your grandkids. It's a pretty nice nest egg, right? So just thinking, hey, somebody's probably going to need this down the road. And the worst case is if you have to take the money out, you're going to pay taxes and potentially a penalty, but you've got tax deferred growth on the thing for many years. So, but those are a couple ideas, strategies, how we see it actually coming into play. Providing it to someone else, leaving it in for grandchildren is like that legacy 529. it's pretty cool when you look at the numbers. I mean, if you have tax-free growth for 30 years when your grandkids are going off to school, yeah, you're going to be happy, I would say. So, so it's fairly the 529s. The great part about them, they've gotten a lot better with their dashboards and so as far as how you can distribute money. So financial aid, we talked about, it's considered an asset of the parent, but as far as actually getting money out of the 529, right? So, and Jonathan, you may weigh in on this, but as far as actually getting money out of the 529, there's two ways that you can do it. The one is you can have it sent directly to the school from most 529s, not all, but most. You can say, I want to have this $10,000 go to XYZ University. They'll send it over and that'll create a tax form you'll get, and it's kind of easy to track. Alternatively, you can say, hey, I want a distribution of $10,000. I'd like to give it to me and I'll track my expenses on this end. So the key with that one is you do have to track your expenses, because if you were ever to get audited, that's where, they would find that maybe.
Yeah, and Joe, I'll just pop in particular with the private college 529 plan, it is that first option. So when you create an account, you have an online portal, and then when it's time to redeem the funds, because it's prepaid, you might say, hey, I've saved up to X number of years, I want to redeem X amount. You log into your portal, you enter the school, we send it right to the school. And then also just one other thing unique for our planner, I guess for prepaids, is that you can choose both a percentage amount, like, hey, I want to fund the entire half of a year, half, so 100% of the semester or 50% of a year, or you can put in a dollar amount and we'll convert it on our end. So just, but it is online and it sends directly to the school.
Yeah. And for most people, I there's differing opinions on that, but from an ease of administration, and then if it just keeps, you get a tax doc that's generated, so you're good to go. And it's okay to, and other plans, if you do take it out, just make sure you keep your expenses, file them with your taxes. They don't ask you to submit all of your receipts for McDonald's and Burger King if that's where you chose to eat with some of the funds, but you do want to keep track at least of the bigger ticket items that you do buy, computers or books or supplies, like you may use those 529s, and just keep the receipts, file them with your tax stuff for the year. So again, pretty easy. I really feel like in the last 5 years, the administration of these they've really come a long way to keep it simple and easy for parents. And part of that process too, like you're going to have, when you're looking at paying the college bill, there's this interesting, this is kind of moving on from 529s a little bit, but I'm going to get down here into these next tabs. We already hit on that one. Skip through that. We'll come back to this smart lending strategy slide, but with the 529s, when you're looking at paying the bills with them, you're going to work through the bursar's office, right? So you're going to have your student is the client, or the student is the person with the relationship with the university, right? So that there's talking about paying for college. One of the things that I actually was working on earlier today for some of the materials we provide is, you have to understand that there are rules around privacy for the student going to college. So that is true all the way through. So when we talk about applying for financial aid, the FSA-ID, if you have already done this, like your federal student aid ID, that tracks with you. It tracks anything that you apply for, any federal aid that you take, which includes student loans and grants. But the key is that you're going to need to work. Oftentimes when we work with families, if you want to have access, you need to specifically request that you have access. And sometimes that requires a power of attorney, and it requires the student signing off, because there's rules called FERPA, which I won't go into all the things, but like basically the privacy of that student is an age of majority now. Once they go off to college, I know parents are typically paying the bills, but those rules are in place because there was some bad apples out there that were stealing grant money from their kids. People always ask, well, why? It's my kid, I'm paying the bill. Well, it's great that you are, but understand once they go to age of majority, what I encourage families to consider is getting legal documents in place, healthcare powers of attorney, financial powers of attorney, so that if things happen, go awry, it's just important part of the process to understand, that you should have medical directives, you should have powers of attorney. So not to get too heavy here, but like for good times and bad, so that you can have visibility and they can, share things with you is the key there. So hopefully that's kind of helpful on a little tip, because it's something that I think a lot of times we don't really focus on. We've got articles on that stuff. You can Google us, but just understand that's an important piece of it. So hopefully that's helpful, like big picture. Now I want to kind of get a little like granular, because as we look through like this process here, right? So it's a crazy maze, but now if we're at the finish line, what we've got to figure out, this is something we'll provide in follow-up, so don't worry about reading every slide here. But what we've got to figure out is how to strategically pay the bill, right? So what I always say is, how are we going to pay for all 4 years of college down to the penny, including the resulting student loans and student loan payments, right? So we need to figure out asset, income. Are there any tax strategies we should think about? If you're a business owner, could you hire a student in the business and shift income? Could you use a tuition reimbursement plan through your small business? These are real tax strategies that do work, particularly for higher income, higher net worth people. Those are things that you can actually do. So beyond the scope of today, but those types of things being very, we talked strategy, creating the budget, but now we've got to get in there with a fine tooth comb and actually figure out how to pay the bill. So how do we distribute effectively, right, from savings and investment accounts? We talked about some of the rules that come into that. Are we eligible for any tax credits, right? Are we eligible for what's called the American Opportunity Tax Credit, right? Or deductions. So is a lifetime learning credit. So understanding those type of things. And then contributions from other family members. When do we want them to come in? When do we want them not to come in? And then selecting and having a smart lending strategy, which we'll spend a bit of time on. So when we look through, let me see if I can get back to the tab. When we look through and we look at like high level, when we're shopping for schools, it's one thing, because we want to understand, hey, if we go here, what's this school likely to cost us? What's the sticker price? What's our net cost? From an affordability standpoint, how do we assess these on a side-by-side basis? Because when we're at this phase of the game, if you're out there and you're shopping, you're going, okay, let's get an idea of what it may cost us, and we're going to give you a predictive outcome. There's every scholarship for every school in the country. We'll predict that with about a 93% accuracy what you'll get. So that's powerful stuff. And we're trying to understand, financials are not the only important thing, but it's part of a three-legged stool, right? You want to find a great academic fit that leads to the career that they're going to get. I think we lose sight of that, that we look at school and we just go to the best school because it's the best sweatshirt I can wear to the football game on the weekend. That's not a way to approach this investment. Unfortunately, that's how intoxicating the school visits are, that they can actually get you to think that way. Because they'll tell you whatever it takes, we'll convince you to come here. So when we look at schools, we look at the sticker prices, but all we care about is the net cost, right? So that's what our affordability tab is really good at, is saying, hey, here's Case Western, here's MIT, Ohio State, here's some great schools, so what's going on? So in these cases, like Case Western, why is it so much more than MIT, right? So people go, MIT, isn't that like really expensive? And I say, yes, it is, because the sticker price is around $79,000, $80,000. We're going to say that they're very good with need-based grants. They don't have scholarships, right? So if you're not a need-based candidate, you really want to consider, is MIT a place we should even consider having our student apply? Because if they go to MIT, and I've been there, I've taught in one of their classrooms before, it's pretty awesome and all the accolades they have, but understand that we just need to know, like, what's our out-of-pocket cost? We want to help understand, like, how do we get in here? What is the cost? What kind of methodology they use? And as you can see, like, they just don't have scholarships. So if you're not a need-based candidate, you're going to pay full price. And then we get into, if we're looking at this school, what are we going to make if we go to this major at this school? What's our first year salary? Is it really worth the premium to go to one school over another for a chosen major? Some majors and some schools, the answer is yes. Many schools, the answer is no. If you're going to be a teacher, you don't need to go to an $80,000 school. You just don't. And affordability profile, we're trying to help people understand, like, is this good for us or not? What we always try to advocate for is, if you're looking at schools, we want to find a funding gap. In this case, based on their budget, they'd have a funding gap of around $27,000. That's a great outcome because it's actually under the federal direct student loan limit. Everybody wants no loans, but the reality is if you go over what you're going to make in your first year salary, we're going to caution you that that's not a great decision because you're going to have a really hard time paying the bill. So when we look at like the concrete numbers, if we looked at this Case Western example, look, if you go here, you've got a budget. Your budget we talked about is 106,000. You're going to have to take out 97,000 in loans. So if you do that over a 10-year period, you're going to owe $1,087 a month. Can you imagine that as a 22-year-old wanting to live in Boston? That's a big. So what the government has done, they're really nice. They're really great about this. We'll let you stretch out your payments for 25 years. You'll just be in debt until you're 50, and you'll pay us 3 times as much interest. These are real things to think about. What is the total cost of this education? Right? Because we're going to say we're going to come up with this, and then we're going to actually, if we do this over 25 years, another $189,000 if we stretch it out. Because this is very tempting. Take the lowest bill because I'm only making this. Right? So I would say, look, I don't think we're sacrificing quality to go to MIT. Right? So when we're looking at like, how do we pay this bill? Look here, $300 a month, we can, we can handle that. Right? Because we're going to be making this kind of salary. See, these salaries aren't that much different. If we really looked at schools as a return on education, that's what we're talking about, getting down to what's it going to cost us. So, this is a big detail. So people would ask, like, how is this school so much more? They're both great schools, high sticker price. These two schools are an interesting one because the way that they look at home equity. The vast majority of schools do not look at home equity, but our elite privates, many of them have chosen which way they want to do that. Case Western assesses home equity. MIT does not. So in this particular case, this is a family with about $500,000 of home equity. Just because of the way that they run their business model, they think you can afford $70,000 more over here because Case Western thinks that your home equity is a resource. That's how nuanced this process is. So for those of you with underclassmen, shopping smart, we're going to give you a predictive outcome of what you're going to get. So, again, this is a free application. And if you want to talk to folks, you can. We've got experts on staff. But, once you get this bill, the big thing is how do we actually pay it? Right? So what do we actually do to pay it? So part of that starts with analyzing your awards. So like we've shopped, we understand what we might get. Now we're at this phase where we're going, how do we analyze these awards to figure out what we're actually going to cost? So the way our system does it is you do an intake form and it's going to say, here's what they're going to cost you. Here's the tuition, room, board, books, fees. If you want to take some things off, you can. But ultimately, what's our discount, right? So do we get any of these grants, institutional grants, or merit scholarship? Were we offered any student loans to help pay the bill? That's an important piece. So, some schools, there's 2 different flavors. So if I look at this example for Northwestern, $86,000 the cost. We got a $40,000 grant. We were offered subsidized at $3,500, unsubsidized at $2,000. You can choose to accept or not. So do we want to take it? Yes, but just the subsidized. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into that student loan piece over here, back down. So to hit on the lending strategy, and then we'll dive back in and go through line by line, how do you actually pay the bill? The best loan out there is the Federal Direct Student Loan, FDSL. So that's tracked through that FSA ID, but it's distributed through the university. Okay, so you're going to have a financial aid award letter. It's going to give you, here's your scholarship or grant, and that reduces the cost. Loans do not reduce the cost of college, nor do work study. So understand that, right? They're disguised oftentimes as such. With the Federal Direct Student Loan, I recommend almost every client utilize the Federal Direct Student Loan. All in the student's name, no cosigner required. Couple of details to understand. There's a subsidized version, meaning you qualified based on need, and there's no interest due while you're in school. The unsubsidized version, everybody's eligible for it as long as you fill out the financial aid forms. So if you have a senior and you're going off to school in the fall and you didn't fill out financial aid forms, you can still fill it out till June 1st. So even just to get these subsidized student loans, right? Because the interest rates are pretty reasonable. They're actually changing July 1. They're going up pretty significantly, as are most interest rates. But as of today, 3.73%. The big thing that I encourage people to understand with these is that they're use it or lose it. So what do I mean by that? Well, there's a maximum over 4 years. 5,500 as a freshman, 6,500 as a sophomore, 7,500 as a junior, 7,500 as a senior. Use it or lose it, meaning you can't go back and get your freshman year loans when you're a junior, right? So if you need student loans, you need to know what you need for all 4 years. because the temptation may be, well, we'll just use 529 and then we'll figure out next year. Where a better strategy to consider is, let's take this federal direct student loan that's in their name and make sure that we have these good interest rates. If any loans are forgivable in the future, these are the loans that are going to be forgiven. Okay, so that's the other piece of this. There's a lot of talk about forgiveness. It will never happen. I can tell you why, but it's federal student loans is the biggest moneymaker for the United States government by about threefold. It is the largest asset of the United States. So I think we can just give up on getting student loans forgiven. But that's just inside ball because I know the way the balance sheet works. But that federal direct student loan, the other piece about it, as a parent, it establishes phenomenal credit, right? So you're going to come out of school if you pay these back and you're on a good repayment. You've taken out a pretty significant amount, and if you pay it back, you're walking out with really good credit. So one of the things about this too is, for parents, you can help them pay this back. Right. So you may say, gosh, we're cash flowing now. We're doing $500 a month. If we just continued that after school, we could help them pay these student loans off. Right. So you can choose to do that. The other thing, people just like skin in the game. They like their students to be able to, they have to sign off on a promissory note. Hey, this semester, this $2,750, this is a loan you are responsible for. Right. So a lot of great reasons. But again, that use it or lose it is the big thing. And then, because if you don't use these federal direct loans, what you're left with is the Parent Plus loan or private loans. So these aren't like bad words, but you really got to look at the interest rates on these things. The Federal Direct Parent Plus loan oftentimes is disguised as financial aid. So be very careful, because it's very easy for them to say, look, we cost $50,000. We've given you a $25,000 package. So your out-of-pocket cost left is only $25,000. If you'd like to apply for a Federal Direct Parent Plus loan, click here. And that loan's usually approved in about 48 hours. And the interest rates, it's about having a 500 credit score. The problem with that is you're going to wake up 4 years from now with $100,000 in student loans. So you got to be very careful with those. Understand, if it's just to fill a small gap, it's okay. And then private student loans, it's a loan with a bank. It's an uncollateralized loan. So be very careful about that. But if a student takes it, they're going to need a cosigner. So just be aware of that. They're almost always required these days. I haven't seen one without it in a long time. So private student loans, they'll give them to you, but I've had private student loans run out on people. They get to that junior year and they're going, you already took out 60,000. We're not going to approve this one for the junior year. So be very careful, understand exactly what loans you need to take for all 4 years. So I'm going to hop back in. We'll do kind of the granular piece of this, because that's really where we get into how to pay the bill. So this is, we're looking at different options here. We've got our awards in. So if I looked at, Loyola, so we're looking high level here. We found a school of Loyola that we thought was a great fit. What we found was they gave us a great scholarship of $25,000. Okay, so here's the costs. They gave us $25,000. And the temptation is always, well, gosh, they gave us $25,000. Like, I don't care. It's still going to cost you 44. That's what we need to understand. I don't really care what scholarship they gave us. I care what we're going to need to pay, right? Because if we have our budget set out, we've got some 529s we've talked about. So the default is we're going to spread those evenly over 4 years, but you don't have to, right? You can move those around. You can figure out, when do we want to pay them? Parent cash flow, right? The grandparent help we talked about, everything flows through. In this case, we don't want them working their freshman, sophomore year, but we do want them to work in the junior, senior year. So plug that into the plan, right? Grandparent help, 20,000. Gosh, what if this was their dream school? Grandpa and grandma, well, they actually said they're going to come up with 40,000, right? So that kind of situation dramatically changes what we're going to have to come up with out of pocket. And then all the way down to, okay, here's your funding gap, 88,000. What about these loans? Well, let's go ahead and use them, but we still got to come up with 61,000. So where do we want to do that? Do we want to take out loans, or do we want to figure out how to apply more resources? So just because you have a gap doesn't mean you have to take out loans, but you do have to account for it, because they're going to want their bill paid every semester for the next 8. So understanding, but having a visual on how do we actually pay the bill? Some from 529, some from here, some from here, some from grandparents. Grandparent, with the way the 529 money comes in, it's kind of beyond the scope of today, but you're going to be very cautious if you have grandparent help coming in right now for the next 2 years. If it comes in, it can really hurt your financial aid in future years. But that is changing. So grandparent help will not be as dramatically impacted. So, but, to sum it up, if we say like, how do we want to do this? Like, cause or do we have other options? Cause like, the big thing with schools is like, if we go find another school that gave us, it's a very similar sticker price of 65,000, but they gave us $30,000 a year. That's 120,000 over 4. We've got a much smaller funding gap. Net cost 153, and we've got our budget lined out here. So our gap here is 47,000. We've got some federal direct loans. So in this case, we got to come up with another 20, but it's not another 60 or 70. So this is how to really compare, analyze, and then get granular on how you're going to actually pay the bill and understand if we go here, here's our loans, here's our loan payment, here's our starting salary at this school, right? So this to me is the college crystal ball, right? If we go here, this is what it's going to look like. So before you commit, hopefully you've taken this exercise. And if you have committed to a school and you're freaking out that it's too much money, you can still go take other options. That has changed a couple of years ago. The 5/1 deadline, it's a fake deadline. So if you put your money down, they may keep your deposit, but if you haven't paid a bill and you really aren't comfortable with your decision, you can still go back and maybe find other schools that will give you more money. So, that's it in a nutshell. So, hopefully that's helpful, kind of big picture, 529 details. But again, this idea of like, can we see into the future, for you underclassmen, look out and see what these schools might cost, and if you need help, you can talk to our experts. So, it's a free application. Collegewell is a great partner of ours. We'll send out follow-up to understand how to get into Collegewell, the discount program we've created. I'll even put this in if you want to go there now. I'll put it in the chat real quick. So, and hopefully it's been helpful, but I'll put this in chat. Let's see, host and panelists. And Jonathan, I'll take questions. I know I talk fast. That's my number one.
No, this was great. And I think, one of them that came in was just asking, Michael asked about the software being used to help families with students already in college. And I would say, yes, you can just kind of plug in the later years, right? And if you're figuring out payment plans for later on.
Yeah. So once you get into compare and negotiate, you put in like when compare and negotiate, that's basically you put in your award and then how to pay. You're still going to navigate through what's year 1 look like, 1 through 4, how are we funded? So,
right. And then one of the other questions that came through was, this is just another general about 529s. How often can you change your asset allocation inside of 529 and change beneficiaries? Is it an annual, policy year, or calendar? And I think that it's
state specific. Consult the state, but they should have that in an FAQ for the state. But typically once a year is common for those. So some are more flexible though. So consult with the actual 529.
Yep. And then finally, Dina asked, is this free to use? And it is free to use. You have a free version, but then just an upgraded version as well.
Yep. Free version. It just limits you to 3 schools, but if you're getting started and wanting to shop, it's a great tool. And then as you need or want to upgrade, you can. So we want every family in America to be more informed on how they're buying college. So that's what we've made available to the public. Yes.
I think
anything in the
just I guess we'll just end with this. We just want to be mindful of everyone's time. This I think is a really great question to end with. For early saving, someone starting out, maybe younger children, is there a best practice in starting a 529? Spread evenly, dip into one first. Like, how do you start? I guess.
Start. It's never too early, but it can be too late. So, I think, if you have a plan, don't be intimidated by those numbers that you got to save $1,137 per month. Get started with something. So, so most plans you could start with as little as $25 a month. So one of the things I talk with younger parents about is whatever you can afford today, you've got to balance that with your current lifestyle. And lifestyle has a lot of choices, by the way. Do you need the Mercedes? Because college is going to come at you. And then also your retirement. So, balance it with retirement, but getting started even with as low as $25 a month. And one of the strategies I'll say is like, each year, as you do in your 401k plan, increase the contribution, right? If you get a salary raise your contribution by $25. So if you start when they're, 5 with $25, well, by the time they're going off to school, you're saving $300, $400, $500 a month. And that really does, it's a snowball, because, you know, it keeps going. Hopefully investments provide for us too. But, you know, just getting started, you know, we mentioned, look at your state plan, if there's any available things there. And, you know, consider, if you're looking at private college, obviously look at the private 529 to see if that's a place to get started. But getting started with something, because anybody can contribute to the 529. So if you set one up and you put in just one deposit, and you say, you can send things out to say, hey, grandpa and grandma, instead of another crappy toy, why don't you put money in their college savings plan? Aunts and uncles too. You know, anybody can contribute. You're the owner. The student is a beneficiary, and you control the distribution. So I say, just, you know, get started. And it takes a village to pay for college these days. So those other people contributing is a big piece of it.
Gifting is huge. Yeah, absolutely. Such an important piece. And like you said, it's everyone can contribute. So
yeah,
I think we hit on most of them. I want to be mindful of folks' time, but
sure.
Joe, excellent as always. I always learn something listening to Joe. Want to thank folks for coming, and we look forward to working with College Aid Pro in the future to do more education webinars. And if you have, you know, certainly check out College Aid Pro and the resources they have. And if you have any questions, want to check out Private College 529 plan at Collegewell, encourage you to go to the site. So.
Yep. And I threw that link in the chat. If people want to get it, we'll send out some follow-up, so you'll know where to go.
Thanks,
everybody. Thanks, Jonathan. Take care.
Have a good one, guys.